Welcome back to Tide Pod, where there's no small amount of news, and it never really stops. Tony had to hop off, and we had to delay our start because there was already stuff going on. So go subscribe to Tide Illustrated. Go look at the board for all of that stuff. But Tony, we have not talked since Kalen Deboer was hired 3 months ago. Oh, sorry, last week. Feels like it's been about 3 months since he's come in, but there's been a lot of stuff that's gone on. But yes, Kalen Deboer, Alabama's new head coach. If you have been living under a rock and didn't see that, um, just kind of summarize your thoughts on that, and then we can start to dive in because at this point it's already old news because everything changes. But that happening and just kind of what you've observed from the team and things that have gone on in the days and I guess about week now since.
Yeah, or a month in
Yeah,
actual
in
feels like
in journalism terms.
yeah. I mean, where to start? Kalen DeBoer, I think is a strong hire from Alabama. It's very much a Greg Byrne hire. I think no one would have said that they would have predicted Kalen DeBoer to be Alabama's head coach a few months ago, a few years ago. I think if I would have told you that Kalen DeBoer is going to be Alabama's next head coach, the first question you would have asked me is, "Who is Kalen DeBoer?" He's kind of a coach that's really worked his way up from the NAIA ranks. Obviously, people know him from his time at Washington, where he was 25-3. Just took Washington to the national championship game. Look, he is a winner. He wins everywhere he goes, and he has an absolutely insane passing game and a really good offense. It's going to be a different hire than what Alabama's used to. He's not Nick Saban. He doesn't bring the same recruiting prowess as Nick Saban. He brings an offensive side of brain, I guess, to the table, where Nick Saban was a defensive side, and it's just going to be different, and it's going to be really interesting to see how he adapts to the South. He's a guy that is from South Dakota, and he's coached mostly out west, and it's just he doesn't have much experience in the South. If we haven't talked since Kalen DeBoer's hired, we haven't talked since half the staff has been hired as well. I guess we can kind of run through that
Yeah.
if you want as well.
I mean, they're headlined by, of course, Ryan Grubb, who we brought with from Washington, and then Womack from South Alabama, who's going to come in as the DC.
Yeah, so we'll start with Grubb. Grubb has been kind of, DeBoer's, I guess you say right-hand man on those offenses. He's put together some really great offenses. He's also worked with DeBoer at Fresno State as well. Last year Washington averaged 343.7 passing yards per game. Obviously, what they've done with Michael Penix Jr., turning him into a finalist. Under Grubb and DeBoer, Michael Penix has piled up 9,544 yards and 67 touchdowns through the air in his 2 years at Washington. So that just shows you what this duo can do, with a quarterback. And, it's kind of exciting. I know, Jack, you wrote something about how does Jalen Milroe fit in. There's a lot of excitement towards and question can Kalen DeBoer and Ryan Grubb, can they make Jalen Milroe into that kind of passer, or are they going to have to find a new passer in this system? It's kind of an interesting thing to look at, but definitely a high-powered offense and a high-powered passing game coming to Tuscaloosa. And then on the defensive side of the ball, you said it, Kane Womack from South Alabama. He's a head coach. Not only were they able to get Kane Womack from South Alabama, they were also able to get Maurice Lindquist from Buffalo. He's going to be coaching defensive backs, and so getting two head coaches onto the staff, I think, is big. Both of those guys have a lot of experience recruiting in the Southeast. They're going to be co-defensive coordinators, so that's going to be big. I think the staff that Kalen DeBoer is putting together is, just as impressive as his coaching resume to date. I mean, we mentioned those hires, just running through it. I know I'm throwing out a lot of information here, but they're also bringing in Jamarcus Shepard from Washington, the wide receivers coach. Just watch the draft this year. You're going to have 3 Washington players drafted, I would say, in the early rounds, a first rounder in Rome Odunze. You're also going to have Jalen Polk and Jalen McMillan, who are probably going to be, they could both be day 2 picks. Those are all receivers that have produced at least 1,000-yard season in the last 2 years. So, I mean, just the talent, they're bringing in from there. Jamarcus Shepard's a really good hire right there. They're retaining Robert Gillespie, who's Alabama's running backs coach. They're also retaining Freddie Roach, who's coach defensive line. Those are really the only two retaining members of last year's staff. Another big person they're bringing over from Washington is Scott Huff. And, Washington produced the Joe Moore winning offensive line. So you're bringing in that offensive line coach. That's big. Part of the news that, we have to stop the podcast for is Alabama's trending really positive for Washington center Parker Brailsford, and he's the top rated center in the portal currently. And that would be a much needed addition if Alabama ends up pulling it off. You'll probably know, depending on when this podcast is, published, or when you're listening to this, he might be an Alabama player. It is certainly trending that direction, but it's not final until he makes that decision. But there's a bit of positivity, and it's been a roller coaster for Alabama. There's a little bit of positivity when you look at the staff. I think I named them all.
I think you did, yeah.
Yeah, tight ends coach Nick Sheridan's coming from Washington. Washington's also bringing Courtney Morgan. It's a general
That'd be
manager.
the biggest one, yeah.
Yeah, that's a big one because he helped build Michigan's team, and then he went to Washington and built Washington's team. And if you look at it, there's your national champion, your national championship game right there. And I think the big thing about getting a guy like Courtney Morgan is I think we're finding out, at Alabama that we're in an era where, without Nick Saban, it's tough to get some of these guys and bring in some of these big name players. And Alabama's collective, I don't think it will be as bad as it is right now, but right now it's very kind of, it's underdeveloped. So there's not a lot of, I think they're struggling in the NIL market right now because they need to get that collective going. I think it is going to get going, but having a guy like Courtney Morgan, a guy that can see talent and bring it in, might be, a really interesting thing for Alabama moving forward. I'm not saying that Alabama is going to be like the new Oakland A's and have to try to find these guys nobody's heard of. Of course, they're going to get the big time talents, but it does help when you're able to kind of see some of these guys that maybe some other people missed. I mean, look at some of the, players that have the Marcel Dariuses, the players that have come in that weren't necessarily can't miss prospects that Saban found. I think that those are going to be even more, impactful or more important when you're looking at NIL, because you can't just afford to just splash, $1 million at every single player. You're going to have to develop. You're going to have to find some players on your own. And I think between Courtney Morgan, between the staff that's being brought in here, I like where Alabama is going from a developmental standpoint. I'm a little bit concerned about how they're going to recruit in the South. A lot of these coaches that I mentioned, some of them do have experience in the South. Not all of them do. So that is the concerning part of this hire. But from a developmental standpoint and from an on the field standpoint, I think Alabama hit it out of the park. And I think some of those recruiting ties, winning will help if they can come in and do that. And then also just, being in this area and developing those relationships, I think will help too. So if I had to choose between the two, I think I'd want someone that, knows ball and knows development more so than just hiring somebody that's just from the South, So I do think that's important. And I think that's a challenge that Kalen Deboer is going to face and his whole staff's going to face. But I think this is a good move. And I think, I think there's more intrigue and more optimism about this hire than there is maybe questioning or concern.
Yeah, I would agree. I think, once Deboer's come in here, he didn't mess around. He very quickly, he knew the people he wanted to bring with him. It seemed like he knew the people he wanted to hire, and he made, that happen. And that was probably a bit refreshing after the brief coaching search that was, where you kind of felt like maybe some of Alabama's options were ticked off and ticking away when they signed, new contracts, whether it was a Lanning or a Sark or a Norvell, whatever it may be. So yeah, I think they've done a good job filling out the people who are kind of going to lead those positions. I think you're right. Like, recruiting in the end, it just comes down to can you win? Can you sell a good vision for your team? I feel like a good recruit, north, south, east, west, wherever they're from, that's what's going to make the difference in terms of what they choose. So yeah, it's certainly still a challenge. He's stepping into possibly big shoes. that he has to fill. But Tony, that's all fine and dandy when it comes to the coaching staff and the way this program is seemingly setting itself up for the future. When we're talking about the present, there's still some, I think, understandably concerned fans in terms of the current roster. And I think you put it best. We've talked off air a couple times about, you know, right now it feels like it's the best time to dunk on Alabama with them losing Saban. And now I think it's 27 or 26 guys who have entered the portal, including some heavy hitters, and I think none heavier than Caleb Downs, the safety who has gone in the last couple of days. Where's Alabama at with that, and how can they kind of start to fix it?
All right, so we gave you some optimism to build you up,
Yeah.
maybe keep you listening.
Now we're gonna tear you down.
To absolutely tear you down. It's 26 by our count. It'll probably be more by the time you're listening. I swear. Like it keeps on getting worse and worse for Alabama in the transfer portal.
I think they've averaged like 3 a day. That's where
Yeah,
I'm at.
it has been some dark times. I think you need to just almost. I hate to say, but like turn off your rivals' updates and just check back.
Well, don't do that. Don't unsubscribe.
No, don't unsubscribe, but maybe just like limit yourself to like checking back every 3 hours because it's going to depress you a little bit sometimes. Then again, I don't know what I'm saying because we just posted some good news, and so Kelly Quinlan's probably not going to be happy for me saying that. I'm just saying from an Alabama standpoint, don't get too carried away by these departures. This is the worst part of the process. I think it's going to get better. Obviously, Alabama's not going to field 56-man roster. They're not going to have Big Al starting at left tackle. Like, they're going to field a competitive roster. I think you are going to see some more departures. At the same time, I think you're going to see some more additions later on. There's only so many people that Alabama can pull from. They're kind of like blood in the water right now with a bunch of sharks circling them. Alabama's players can leave, but not everyone else's roster's open. So they're going to have to wait until the spring. I assume they're going to be very busy in the transfer market in the spring when they can make some additions. Obviously, there's still some players in the portal that they can reach after. And then you never know. I mean, if Jim Harbaugh was to leave Michigan, then that opens up that roster. And then if somebody was to replace Jim Harbaugh, that opens up that roster. And all of a sudden, you have the unraveling and the rosters keep on opening up. That's kind of what happened with, Alabama and Washington and then Arizona, so it's just it's interesting. I think that Alabama is going to field a competitive team. I think you just kind of gonna have to be patient about it. And they are going to lose some players. And I think they'll field a competitive team. On the other hand, I don't think they'll be as strong as we thought they were going to be heading into next year. They lost too many players. You look at a Caleb Downs and a Kadyn Proctor. Those are two guys that were going to be big time players for Alabama. That it looked like Caleb Downs, let's start with him, was, on track to be probably the most productive and best defensive back Alabama's ever seen. He had that good of a freshman year, and you just were expecting him to build off of that. And then Kadyn Proctor is a guy who really struggled with his first year at Alabama, but I think he had kind of turned the corner, and he was going to be kind of that anchor at left tackle. And now Alabama is losing both tackles because J.C. Latham's going to the NFL, and they're losing their starting center in Seth McLaughlin. So that's 3 starters from last year's offensive line. Don't even get me started on the secondary after Downs. They only return 1 starter from the secondary in Malachi Moore. You're losing Terrion Arnold and JaQuincy McKinstry to the Kool-Aid McKinstry. My brain's gone.
You used official titles.
Yeah, I don't know why I'm using this as official title, but yeah, Kool-Aid McKinstry and Terrion Arnold to the pros. You're losing Jalen Key to eligibility, Caleb Downs to the transfer portal, and you're even losing Trey Amos to the transfer portal as well. So dark times right now in terms of depth, but I assume that Alabama is going to make some transfer additions, and I just don't think it's going to be as bad as maybe it looks right now.
Yeah, it's hard to say, right? Because you have to wait until that spring window opens for, their options to truly be open in terms of who else could come in and fill what is a large amount of holes, like you said. I mean, you touched on the O-line and the secondary. Let's dive into that. Actually, before we do that and talk about some more specific position groups, because I want to ask you about the wide receiver room and even especially the wide receiver room as well, because there's some problems there. With Downs, I do think that's, he is a headliner and we don't need to harp on him too much. But, personally, having been around the team last year and even with Saban, I don't think, maybe it's one of those cases where nothing should surprise you when a guy like that retires in terms of what happens next. But how surprised were you to see him opt to try and at least test the waters and likely take his talents elsewhere?
Not super surprised. I mean, a lot of these kids, they came. It's tough for Alabama fans to hear, maybe, but they came for Saban. They didn't come for Alabama. These kids didn't necessarily grow up rooting for Alabama. I think they appreciate the history, but they can find that at a lot of places, And I think that they came for Nick Saban. So you come for Nick Saban, and he leaves, then yeah, you're going to test the market, where I'm sure he's getting a lot of good monetary offers for NIL. And I think he's getting, a lot of attention from top programs that are enticing, with coaches that are really good. So it's not super surprising. It just stings for Alabama. I think, with Caleb Downs, it's just tough. It's tough to mention, because I think he was going to be the leader of the defense and probably one of the most important players on the team this coming season. And it looked for a second like, there was a little bit of a delay. It looked like maybe Alabama could keep him, and there was some optimism building. And so it stings even more when he leaves for Alabama. But you really can't dwell on it. I mean, they lost a lot of big time players as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's Downs. He's the, I don't want to call it cherry on top. That's the exact opposite tone I'm trying to give off here. But for lack of a better term, that on top of a DB, departure, just wave. I mean, that's definitely been the area of the biggest loss. So let's dive into that. I mean, some specific position groups. You mentioned the offensive line. For me, again, you mentioned that article I wrote about Milroe. It's, I felt like I was even getting off tracks at times when I was talking about his fit with Deboer, but possibly the biggest, roadblock to Milroe fitting into Deboer's system is the fact that he doesn't have, three 1,000-yard receivers like the guys you mentioned that Michael Penix did at Washington. I mean, the wide receiver room has also kind of been gutted. Whether it's there or another position group on the field, what's kind of the biggest area of concern, or maybe the weakest group right now that might, be improved upon with some possible portal additions?
Yeah, I mean, one person we didn't mention when we're talking about departures, a big one is Isaiah Bond. He's leaving for Texas.
Of course.
He's supposed to be Alabama's leading receiver next year, and led Alabama in receptions this year. Obviously, the other half of that gravedigger play. So just that's another gut punch loss. But I think when you look at the offensive side of the ball, I have a lot more optimism in Deboer's ability to kind of make players work. And before I get into that too, I think it's also worth mentioning that Ryan Williams, the 5-star freshman, also decommitted. That's going to be a guy that I think Alabama could still get. And if that's the case, I think that really helps with the departure of Isaiah Bond. I think Ryan Williams can kind of fill that hole. So, you're talking about, kind of building up those playmakers around Milroe or the offense, that he's really key to doing that. Even if they miss out on him, though, I like Deboer's ability to be able to kind of improve on people. I think when you look at like a Kobe Prentice per se, in Deboer's offense, the way with his offensive mind, I think he can turn somebody like, Kobe Prentice into an Isaiah Bond from a production standpoint. So it's not that Alabama doesn't necessarily have options. I mean, they've got guys like Jalen Hale, who, we saw a lot of glimpses of him last season. Kendrick Law is a guy that can do a ton of things for Alabama. He played in a bunch of roles. You saw what Tommy Reese did with Kendrick Law. Just imagine what Kalen Deboer and Ryan Grubb can do with him, and all the stuff that they're going to do to get him the ball in open space. That's exciting. You've got a ton of receivers coming in that I think can be, exciting players as well. So it looks a little barren, and it is in terms of production. Alabama lost its top 3 receivers because they also, another person we're not mentioning is Amari Nablack, the tight end. He entered the transfer portal. Alabama really doesn't have another tight end like him, like a mismatched guy like him on the roster. So maybe they do in Caleb Odom, but he came in a little bit. He's a freshman. He came in a little bit thin. He's going to have to bulk up, but that could be a situation where Alabama kind of goes to a freshman for an early impact player. But that being said, I think that, from a production standpoint, it's not there. You look at it, they lost a lot of yards and receptions and a lot of the difference makers, but I still think there's a lot of talent returning to the roster. And I'm more confident in Kalen Deboer's ability to, progress that on the offensive side of the ball, just given his track history as an offensive coach, it's a little bit less concerning when you lose those stars than when you lose guys like Caleb Downs, who not to say that Kane Womack's going to do anything. I have full confidence in him as well, but I think that the defensive departures hurt a little bit more since you're bringing in two of the best offensive minds in the game in Grubb and Deboer.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Downs, like, it's hard to overstate what he brings. I mean, the guy's a game breaker and he plays safety and he was as a true freshman. So, um, you're right, and you lose someone in that area in the field. It's a place that takes, so much skill. But yeah, I think I agree. Deboer at his previous stops, he's shown he's kind of been able to do something with nothing at times. I mean, like the example I'll go back to is like even when he was the OC for one season at Indiana, I know he took that team from like 10th in the Big Ten in total yards to fourth, which, I know it's the Big Ten and it's Indiana, but you have a lot more resources at Alabama to probably do a lot more damage even in your first season. So a quick turnaround, I don't think is impossible here in terms of how well he can keep Alabama at the top. Is there other position groups or even other storylines? I know there's a whole bunch we could dive into a ton of stuff, but to keep it concise, I mean, what other things should Alabama fans maybe be, concerned over, excited about? Maybe things people aren't paying attention to that should, but just just things to watch moving forward.
There's a lot of holes on this team. I think you still need to find now you're going to need to find answers on the offensive line. It looks like Alabama might be finding its center in Brailsford, but then I think that now you got two bookends that you got to replace in Kadyn Proctor and JC Latham. I, you look at what they have coming back. I mean, they got Elijah Pritchett, who was in competition to start for the left tackle role with Proctor. You'd assume he takes on one of those starting spots, but he's still a little bit of an uncertainty. Like what is Alabama going to get from him? He's been kind of a roller coaster ride of potential and frustration so far in his career. And then I don't know who you'd put at the other tackle spot at the moment. Maybe Wilkin Formby might get a look earlier than expected. Naquil Bertrand, the guy that they brought in from Alabama, he's a guy that I think was originally viewed as maybe somebody that they would have to develop, but maybe he gets an earlier shot. So, or maybe they bring in somebody else from the portal. That's kind of the thing that you have to watch forward, and you really can't make too many snap judgments. It's kind of a fun exercise, and I've been trying to kind of play along on the message boards and kind of provide a look at like what the depth chart would look like now. But really, we're just guessing because there's going to be some more additions. There's going to be more subtractions, and you really kind of got to see that before you can really make expectations on the team. You wouldn't want any more if you're looking to watch for something moving forward. You wouldn't want any more key departures. Alabama can't. We're getting to a point where Alabama can't lose very much more. Big time guys. You start losing any more key receivers, and then you start thinking like, okay, well, really, who is Jalen Miller going to throw to? Or if you lose any more offensive linemen, it gets to the point where it's like you can't rebuild a whole offensive line through the portal. So, Alabama took a lot of hits. I think that now we're going to have to start seeing them bounce back a little bit. And there's reason to believe that they will. I think that there's, like I said, I think they're going to make some noise in the portal later. And eventually this 30-day window, as though it probably feels like a 3-year window for Alabama fans, eventually it will end. And eventually Alabama will have a certified roster. And then we'll be able to look at things going from there. So just hang tight, try to be optimistic. It's a tough time. I still think that, as dark as everything looks, Alabama's Alabama, and it will field a competitive roster. I think at the end of it, will they be the SEC favorite? Probably not anymore. I do think that they'll be an SEC contender, though. I do think that they'll, be able to field a roster that is competitive in the conference.
Agreed. I mean, I think you have to give Deboer the chance, and I feel like you have to just give him the chance to be his own coach. Like, I know Saban's still going to be there as an advisor and still be, which he should be. I mean, to have him around as a football mind, I think is great. But, I think you need to let this, team take on a new identity under Deboer. I think, you can't cling on to what Alabama was under Saban just because it's impossible for any team to be what it was with Nick Saban when Nick Saban isn't there anymore. So I think I think you just need to let, kind of Deboer put, get his fingerprints on the offense or on the team, especially the offense. And just, yeah, kind of let him do his thing. And it's hard. It's a tumultuous time. So that's the best time to subscribe because there's the most news to digest and get into.
One thing I would say too is it could be a lot worse. I know it sounds really
Mhm.
bad right now, but I mean, can you imagine if Alabama struggled in its coaching search? I mean, all this happened and Alabama had a head coach. If
Right.
they spent any time, it's only really been a little over a week since Nick Saban retired. If this coaching search had strung on past, a week, if we're still sitting here talking about who's going to be the next Alabama coach, man, it would have been way worse. There would have been a lot more departures, a lot
Yeah.
more uncertainty. So the fact that Greg Byrne moved as fast as he did, it doesn't seem like it right now, but it limited a lot of the damage that could have. It could be way worse right now. I think Alabama is making a lot of steps that will help it in the future, and the coaching moves it's making, you know, they look solid, and I think that the future is there for Alabama. It's just there's no team that's going to be able to survive losing the best coach in college football history and the shock that comes after that. So for what Alabama's been able to do, I think it's actually been pretty remarkable. Even though to say remarkable and to look at all the hits that Alabama's taken, it's kind of it's hard to say that, but I think that like I just keep on saying, it could have been way worse for Alabama.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Like, I think Greg Byrne highlighted that when he went on Feinbaum recently, where he was like, "Look, I had to stand in front of the players, and I said, you guys need to give me 72 hours to get the new guy in, and then please wait till then to make your decision." And some people didn't, and I'm not knocking those players for not doing that, but that just shows, yeah, like he knew that. All right, I've got to at least I've got to get this guy in quickly to then let like players make a chance. I think Alabama fans are a lot more angry if, we're still looking for the new coach, and Caleb Downs has said, "What's going on? I'm gone." Versus at least, he could have a meeting with Deboer, get the idea, maybe get the name of who, he didn't know, or see who the new defensive coordinator is going to come in, and then make a decision to be like, okay, I'm going to go elsewhere. Like, you'd much rather have that. I think you're right. Than what would have been the alternative, which would have just been them, been going through a coaching carousel. But
And you can't blame these kids either. I mean, like we talked about how it felt like 3 months for us. It feels like 3 months for them as well. I
mhm.
mean, for these kids not knowing who their next coach is, and then you have people, don't think that players just get hit up the second they enter the portal. I mean, these kids are getting reached, maybe through intermediaries, but they're getting reached.
Oh yeah.
And they know the interest is there, and so they have people pushing them to join the portal, and um, it's just tough, and each kid's different, and each kid committed for a different reason, and sometimes money is a thing, and sometimes it's just it's not just Nick Saban that left too. I mean, you talked about the coaching staff. A lot of these kids had big bonds with the coaches that left. Travaris Robinson was a big reason why Caleb Downs left. I think you not only lose Nick Saban, you lose your position coach, and all of a sudden it's just like who am I familiar with here? It's
Yeah, who do
just
I have here? Yeah.
yeah, is it even home anymore? Is it, it's only been a year. So to lose those kind of key figures in his life here at Alabama, that's tough to deal with. So you get it from a kid's standpoint. I know it's real easy to be mad at the kids, and fans are going to be mad at the kids no matter what I say. I just I do understand it both ways, and so it's a tough time for everyone. And like Nick Saban said, that there's no good time to retire. This is definitely not one though, because of everything where Alabama, the position it's in, where it really can't grab other players from other teams, but it's getting its players poached. It's tough for everyone to deal with, but I do think there is an eventual light at the end of the tunnel.
Certainly, certainly. Well said, Tony. Any final things? I mean, I know we can't cover everything on here, so go
I'm lost.
subscribe.
I feel like I've been talking
Yeah.
fast and trying to get everything out of my brain, and try to get as much information, but there's so much information. There's so much going on. I'm just looking back through our podcast. I'm trying to think of like what did we miss. The best thing I can say is go in the Tide Illustrated, and we have it all there. All the
Hmm.
information is there for you to read and digest, and it'll be a lot slower than me talking a million words a minute. But no, there's a lot of stuff to discuss, and there'll be a lot of stuff to discuss next week as well.
Yeah, certainly. We'll have more news, more headlines. We'll get into all of it. Until then, yeah, everyone go subscribe to Tide Illustrated. Subscribe on the YouTube if you're watching there. Drop a comment on just kind of what you're feeling, what your vibes are. We'll hear you out. Someone will respond, I promise. But yeah, until then, we'll be back next week. Everyone take it easy. Don't stress too much, and see you next time.